20th century fascism was started by Benito Mussolini on November 7th, 1921 in Rome, Italy. The reason for it being started was because in 1914, Italy was debating whether or not they wanted to join the war, World War I at the time, and the Socialist Party of Italy did not want anything to do with the war, but the Nationalist Party wanted to join the war, and Benito Mussolini was one of those nationalists. And so what he decided to do was branch off and create his own form of government called the fascists. And in this group of fascists, they started to gain a little bit of a following, and then they started to run for office, and they would lose. So what they decided to do was use force to get their place in the government. So they would kill politicians. They would use scare tactics against civilians. They would do all these sorts of things, and so eventually the government didn't want to have this large any more deaths or any more murders or this chaos going on. So they decided to let Benito Mussolini have control and the Fascist Party have control. So Benito Mussolini was able to become the dictator of Italy, and so now fascism was in control of Italy. And there was a huge problem with this because their belief system was very radical, and they believed that fascism was a civic religion, and it required and then citizens were required to worship the state through nationalism, and that one leader had complete control and authority, and only allow religions that are nationally or historically tied to that state. So something like Romanian. And the state is governed in the interests and beliefs of the leader, and all are to follow and agree with his doings. And there were strict class structures, which was believed to be necessary to prevent chaos. And the individual in the nation was considered meaningless. And it's pretty radical. And you would say, why? Well, how did these people gain a following? The way they gained a following was through their nationalism. They made it to where it was an honor to serve their country. And, they got people riled up, and they got people really into it. And they said, let's take back what is ours. Let's go out there, let's fight, and let's really show the world what we've got. And so they were able to do that and gain a following. And through Benito Mussolini's speeches and talks and other things like that, he really got them riled up and believing that they could take on the whole world. And so he was able to have a large army. He had a draft, and then that is basically how he did it, and that's how fascism really started, and that's how it started in the 20th century. And now let's move on to communism. So communism is something kind of similar to fascism, but not really. But they're two very similar ideologies, but they have their differences. So some of the rules or ideologies in communism is that the production is organized to provide for the human needs without the use of money. So all the production that any of the people made was to really just go to the state, and anything those people did was to go to the state, and then the state would collect all the money that they made, and they would distribute it evenly. And the difference between fascism and communism is that communism really they were more for the people, and they wanted to make everybody a lot more equal. So what people would do was people wouldn't work as hard in communism because they knew they would still get paid the same. And communism also did not believe in the class system. So there weren't really classes. There was no really rich or poor. You had rich and poor, but it was just not as big of a difference compared to fascism. And there was also a collective output that should be redistributed redistributed equally, so people wouldn't really work as hard, but they would have the entire nation working for the nation and for communism. And the reason communism was able to gain such a big following was because of the poor community. The poor community liked this because they were able to get more money from the state and more money in general. And this was a huge reason to why communism came about too. And the class society in which people share in the production of goods or services means less hierarchy. And there was another slight difference with communism, which is that they rejected and abolished all religions. But let's get on to the similarities. They both had one party system. Collective is more, and then they both believe that collective is more important than the individual. So they believe that if you are doing good and you die and you're still working for your country and you died working for your country, then that is a lot better if you produced more for your country than you did for yourself. And then they both promote revolutionary change over gradual change. And then they both rejected they rejected the free market society, and they also both believed that government control was necessary. So they basically wanted the government controlling their lives and controlling what they did. And this is probably the biggest similarity. They both had the use of violence. They both used violence to get to higher positions. Communism did it the exact way that fascism did. They used scare tactics. They killed other people, killed politicians. They did things to scare the other parties out of office. And they were both very big into militarism. And so what this meant was they believed that most of their money should go to their military, so they could have the biggest military, be the biggest power. And that's what they really wanted. They wanted to overtake the world with this. And they both really controlled their religions too. And so they were both really controlling over the people. The people didn't really have independence. They didn't really make their own decisions. And everything was planned. The economy was planned. Just what everybody did was planned. Like, everybody had their role in society. And so really, this was a very corrupt way of thinking for no matter what in this government, everything. And it really just it just didn't really work out for either of them, because at the end both communism and fascism never really worked. And they were both similar and different in their own ways, but they were just too radical of ideas, and they were never able to obtain that glory that they always wanted. And they kind of used propaganda to trick people into following them. And I know and there were a lot of people in the society that didn't really believe in either, like in Italy, they didn't really believe fascism, and the people in communism didn't really always believe in communism. People would be forced into these lives because they couldn't revolt against the government. And it was just a lose-lose situation for both sides, and it really wasn't fair to either side. Thank you, and that was my presentation over fascism and communism.